Hi everyone. Welcome to the Patriot Pair podcast, where we present our views on the raging issues from geopolitics to culture and everything in between. So, let's get started with today's episode. So basically, we're getting into this topic today, and I just want to, before we get into it, we are not trying to make it a left versus a right situation. The topics we're going to cover, obviously, I know at some point it's gonna really feel like that is what this is going towards, but I feel certain rights are afforded to us as citizens of India, which is a blanket thing. It's not something that should be based on a party, and simply it should never induce the feeling of insecurity just based on which party is in power and if that guarantees your right or lack thereof.
These discussions are also not anti-India. None of this relates to the Indian heritage, Indian people, or Indian structures. It only relates to the people who have tried to grab power in the past and might again do so.
Which is the case for, I'd say, any country in the world. It is necessary for us being citizens of India to point out our shortcomings and safeguard against such in the future.
It is again only a podcast, an episode about warning against authoritarianism, and only thing it could be against is communism. I am unabashedly an anti-communist.
Which we will illustrate in the coming topics that we cover. And well, let's actually now get into it. So basically the topic for today is we as a country have always been proud of our constitution, and we laud the fact that we have taken inspiration from many constitutions and of countries erstwhile at the point that our constitution was created.
Also, we constantly are very proud that our constitution is the lengthiest.
Which is, I don't understand. See, you should be proud of the contents of the character, not
exactly
its appearance, and we are very proud of the appearance, which is its length.
It should be the merit. It's same as saying in an examination, this student has written more words. Doesn't matter if the words matter. Doesn't matter if the words amount to something better. Is a better explanation of the thing. Is more substance. It does not matter if those more words are more substance. You just want more words, more lengthy. That does not make an answer of a student better. That does not make our constitution better. I'm not saying our constitution is bad. All I'm saying is the point of pride is not the length of the constitution, and the point of pride is not who we took it from. The point of pride should be what is good in our constitution. Solely that.
In fact, in a lot of situations, I would say it takes away from the point of pride based on who exactly we have actually taken constitutional points from.
Let me give a spicy example. It's like a woman who achieved a whole bunch in her life, but you only credit her by saying, wow, you're a woman and you did that. So the point of pride is being a woman, not the achievements.
Yeah, which takes away from said achievement. In a similar fashion, circling back to the original point, why are we still, in a lot of ways, I mean, we have and we are still trying to do it, copying from failed states which overtly hinder the rights and freedoms of their citizens.
And failed states in the sense that the states that have actually already failed, as in they don't exist anymore. For example, the USSR. No, Russia is not the USSR. USSR fell. Russia is whatever was left. And other states that are actively failing, or states that have not, you might say, not failed, but they're essentially dictatorships. For example, China. China is not the ideal state to copy anything from.
It doesn't set the best example for...
We're definitely not getting any sponsors from China ever. And this is definitely going to get...
that I say cheers.
Yes.
But my point is, another failed state that we have copied from is, at least USSR was still an existing country at the point of conception of our constitution.
Oh.
But this specific part really makes no sense to me, because it was already a failed state and it had a very fresh outcome to its failure at the point we were building our constitution. We copied from
The Weimar
Germany, the Weimar Constitution of Germany, which had existed from 1919 to 1933, post World War I and just before World War II. And one of its illustrated lackings has been the fact that it leaves too much of a leeway for authoritarianism to seep in.
Guess which part we took from that constitution? The part where authoritarianism could seep in. And guess how Hitler and the Nazi party came to power, using those exact same powers.
And we took that from them, and I guess we're also proud of that.
I wonder whose idea was that.
More to think about. So, from Germany, we took the concept of emergency and suspension of fundamental rights during that time. And considering our history and some very specific incident called the emergency that was also executed in our country in a certain time period during...
Pause. Now, before we go forward, I want to explain what, for the younger ones amongst us, what the emergency was and what happened. Indira Gandhi had declared emergency in India in June 25, 1975. The reasons for such said emergency was internal disturbance and threats to national security. The immediate triggers for that emergency, the reasons behind such internal disturbance and threats to national security were: Allahabad High Court had found Indira Gandhi guilty of electoral malpractices and disqualified her for parliament. That created a threat to her power. That was one reason. Another one, there were widespread protests and strikes across the country, led by the opposition
as a blanket,
demanding her resignation. Well, I would say, yeah, understandable, since the High Court had already found her guilty. So instead of appealing to the Supreme Court or doing anything of going through the legal channels, she decided to just take power.
Also, Indira Gandhi, in her very smart idea of, people are speaking up against me and doing certain things, so I'll just prove them right, I guess, by executing a state of emergency and incarcerating a lakh people, 100,000 people who were from opposition, journalists.
Those were specifically people who spoke against her. In this numbers that are these are all political prisoners. This does not include actual criminals. This does not include other stats. This is just the political prisoners by Indira Gandhi during that emergency.
Just the 2-year mark. That's not even like a very long time. It's
difficult to find a lakh people.
I'd say she was very dedicated and also pins her perfect.
Yes, as exemplified by her other policies, including, well, we'll get to that.
Anyway, we took from Germany the state of emergency and the concept of emergency and exactly how we can go about suspending the fundamental rights during that time. One of the things that also happened during the emergency, it was happening before that as well, but it really got ramped up during those 2 years, was the implementation of forced sterilization. And before emergency, they had set annual targets, by the way, which to me does not really make much sense of, how blatant can you get with very overt clarity regarding your biases and just very blatant disregard for any human rights or fundamental rights or any right thereof. People were coerced into going for these forced sterilizations, both men and women.
People were coerced is a false statement, is a misnomer in itself. If it's a forced sterilization camp, then there is no need for coercion. That is just a government stat. That's like saying when Chernobyl happened and firefighters and other people had to go and stop the fires. It's like saying they volunteered. The people who volunteered didn't know what they were volunteering for.
And so before this emergency period, there were sterilization programs already ongoing. She introduced this in 1966-67 period, and they set annual targets, by the way, for at least a sterilization of, I guess, a 1.3 million or so in an as an annual target, and it got ramped up to around 3.5 million to 4 million sterilizations in the 70-71 period. Parallelly, by the way, during this period, we were also going through the Pakistan-Bangladesh war. So it really illustrates the priorities of a government, where they're on one side fighting a war, at the other end they're trying to also sterilize their population.
Another point in this whole forced sterilization thing is just why. Why was there a need to limit the population? Why is there constantly a thing, or at least was during these Nehruan governments, during these times where each government that came into power was trying to grab more and more power and just a dream of becoming a dictator someday?
Oh, they weren't dreaming. I'd say Indira Gandhi achieved that dream.
Came close. If she had lived, she would have achieved it.
She did. I would say, how far do you get with your dictatorship if you're already doing forced sterilizations? There are, and by the way, this was specifically the biggest victims of the sterilization program were the uneducated, the poor people from the scheduled castes and such.
So the people that the Nehru government and the Constitution and Indira Gandhi government constantly said that we must provide equality to them.
And also she got popularized and got into power by being the voice of the poor and the downtrodden, and with the slogan of Garibi Hatao, somehow really goes against that motto when you're trying to also literally execute the Garibi Hatao movement by literally removing the existence of said Garibs.
Garibi Hatao? No. Garib Hatao. That's what they were doing. Equality? How? Well, if there are no scheduled caste, if there are no people to be discriminated against, there would be no discrimination, would there? That is exactly the communistic policies or dictatorial policies that happen in every budding and existing dictatorship, and somehow it tracks with every communistic society.
On which note, while this sterilization programs and everything were going on in India during the 60s, parallelly something similar was also going on in China, which really tracks into the whole thing of again taking inspiration from failed states. Now in this situation, I'm not calling them a failed state in the sense, sure, they do exist as a country still, but they're not a state in the truest sense. They are not there for their people. They are simply just a dictatorial regime that is absolutely blatantly, vehemently against their own people. So basically this was going on in China soon after we started doing it in India, and annually we kept increasing our annual targets, which so happy about neutering our own population. Then during the emergency they doubled their stats and 8 million annual sterilizations were being done.
That's a lot of data points. First thing I want to address here is they were treating human population as animals, as a herd to be culled. They were that's what you do with pets and
street dogs.
Yeah, so they were treating their population, human population, as street dogs. Just sterilize them because they won't know what's good for them. Don't let them decide if they want to have kids or not. Take the option away. It's not that far back. There were also reversible options. They didn't have to do things that were irreversible.
And also while doing it, they were heavily misleading their population. They were not giving them proper information to exactly what was being done to them. Telling them it's half-cooked information is essentially also taking away the right of consent from actually the people who might have even voluntarily consented to this procedure to being done, because what are they consenting to? To lies.
And a point for all the feminists today, the biggest victim of all of this was women.
Yes, after this whole program was scrapped, and this is why I wanted to get into the stats, because when you look at the numbers, 8 million people being sterilized per year during the state of emergency is 80 lakh people. That is not a small number, and so many people have constantly been like, sure, there was sterilization, but how bad could it really have been? Not many people were affected. It is not a small number. People just don't know the numbers.
It didn't happen to me, so it must not have been that bad.
Do you know how many people Hitler killed during his Nazi regime?
6 million Jews.
Yeah, Indira Gandhi ended up sterilizing more than that in a singular year.
How many?
8 million people.
6 million Jews killed by Hitler.
In
8 million
in the whole chunk of his
of him being Hitler.
yeah.
Hitlered
Less people than Indira Gandhi, I guess Gandhi.
Gandhi.
It's like it should be a verb like the Clintoning of.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't want to talk too much about it. I don't want to be Clinton or Gandhi.
Yeah. So basically, we took inspiration from a certain country, Germany, and then we went worse, way worse, on our own people who, not we per se, certain authoritarian regimes were created which gave them so much power to do worse to the people they were proclaiming to be the government of.
Now, Germany has ratified those same things, and currently Germany does provide in those same powers. They obviously made a new constitution, all of that, and they improved upon their mistakes. India has not. They explicitly provide right to resist even during emergencies. India does not. Let me explain the right to resist. Right to resist is the legal or moral entitlement of individuals or groups to oppose through civil disobedience or even, according to right to resist, even by force, a tyrannical government or foreign occupation.
Meanwhile, we were out here getting neutered by our government.
At that point,
why not?
At that point, I would say that's a tyrannical government. What would the US do? The founding fathers of the United States.
Let US be, I would say, in that situation. What's Germany standing for? They really had a bad start to the century of 1900s and 2000s, but they really made a big turnaround, and yet here we are stuck with the same situation, the same bad policy, bad law we took from the bad times of Germany.
Nazis.
And just going with it.
Nazis. We took from Nazis, and we have Nazi laws in our constitution. And funny part is, Gandhi did civil disobedience. That's what he's most known for.
Well, it's Mahatma Gandhi, not Indira Gandhi.
Cool. Mahatma Gandhi, some boof. So, Mahatma Gandhi is known for civil disobedience.
Yeah.
Right to resist is not allowed in India, even like during emergency times and such.
Yeah, and which
means you cannot even resist through civil disobedience
during the time of emergency. Yes. And who and why can the state of emergency be declared? Well, because.
Yes. What are the reasons for declaring state of emergency? Well, let me cite again what Indira Gandhi said. Her reasons for declaring emergency were internal disturbance and threats to national security.
Very vague, very umbrella terms, and as it showed, well, as I said, because no reason needed which would actually stand through, because let's say once you've declared the state of emergency, you can't exactly protest against declaration of said state of emergency.
Now let me tell you exactly what powers she gained immediately by declaring the state of emergency. Under Article 352 of the Constitution, the emergency allowed her to rule by decree, suspend civil liberties, censor the press, and imprison political prisoners, political opponents.
Which she did willy-nilly, and
1 lakh of them.
Including journalists and other dissenters in her own party, I'm guessing. So, yeah, that is just the Germany side of something we took for our constitution. Let's come back to our apparent friend, USSR.
The much worse, I would say, yeah, the policies we took from the USSR are much worse.
Because they're more day-to-day hitting than...
And because USSR killed more people than Germany.
Which people tend to kind of, forget.
And USSR killed more of their own people than Hitler ever did. Stalin alone killed more people than Hitler ever did. But nobody ever talks about it because he was a communist, and there's a lot of communist sympathizers out there.
So, what did we take from the USSR, the erstwhile irrelevant failed state?
First thing we took was 5-year plans.
We took the 5-year plans, which were extension or more so integral part of constitutionally mandated planning commission for economy of the country. First off, I don't understand why is there a need to constitutionally mandate a planning committee or a planning commission. We took a constitutionally mandated planning commission which we utilize as our 5-year plans, And what's the significance of said 5-year plans?
Stated objectives and features of our 5-year plans as taken from the USSR. Let's just state that. Centralized state control over resource allocation and major industries. That's one aspect of it. Emphasis on public sector expansion, heavy industry, and import substitution. Import substitution. Make in India program, but by force. Objectives included economic growth, self-reliance, social justice, reduction of inequalities, and regional development. Wow, what social justice and reduction of inequalities when the sterilization of SCs, STs happened?
Yep. And it really, my whole point is, what is the need for a 5-year plan? Sure, it goes very well and hand in hand with the fact that we have 5-year tenures of government. And what it leads to is one government comes in and says they're going to do something in this 5-year plan. And then the next government comes in and then they want to do something else.
Another thing is, for example, I'll again cite the example of it's not even the US, most countries in the world have first 100 days principle. What did the government do in its first 100 days? We have mostly had 5-year plans. What is the 5-year plan? Well, when will you know if it was effective or not? At the end of the tenure. Before that, how would you question that? The plan is still in action.
It's the same principle that every communist agenda is based on. The revolution lives on.
Oh yeah, and the revolution never dies. It really never dies.
Neither does the 5-year plan.
Now, my problems with the 5-year plan thing are inefficiency and bureaucracy. Number one, it's the license raj that comes with centralized planning of everything, and the government taking control of all major industries. It is changing, and change is coming, slow but steady. What we're talking about here is not what's happening today. We're talking about history. What happened? And how did we get here, and what are the things that are still in the constitution? We're talking about things that should be a mirror to reflect upon.
Basically trying to find ways to safeguard against making the same mistakes.
We've had good governance for a few years. I don't want to specify how many, but it can always change. Some authoritarian government can always come.
It's simply, if it's based on the guy in a certain seat being either good or bad, we really have some loopholes in our law which can be, at any point of their choosing, exploited.
We can anytime have the next Indira Gandhi or the next Nehru.
And we need to be aware, at least, of the problems, the red flags of our constitution, which have been and could be at a later date exploited in the name of doing good for the people.
Now, since, again, let's go back in time. Let's talk about how our country's 5-year plans and everything started. We did not allow free market at all. The government chose certain oligarchs and made them the oligarchs. Certain people who aligned with the government at that time, whoever was in power, if you align with them, you become the next oligarch. If you have power, money, and you align with the current government, you become the next oligarch.
Which I guess, not good, I'd say.
And those are the people who get licenses for power. Those are the people who get licenses for example, the mining industry. That is one big thing. Mining is so heavily regulated in India, and I don't have a problem. Put up reasonable restrictions. That's called foreshadowing. Put up reasonable restrictions on mining. Understandable. Why must the government choose which company exactly will do mining and which will not? You cannot buy land to mine upon. You don't have mining rights anywhere in India. You don't have mining rights on your property. You cannot buy mining rights, have perpetual mining rights. You lease mining rights from the government in India. Now, let's take the example you were talking about. What example do you want to take here?
I was just thinking about the simple fact that, let's say you have a house. Someday you randomly think of digging...
No. Make it bigger. Let's say you have a 100-acre farm. You must be rich for this, right? Let's say you have a 100-acre farm somewhere, right?
And randomly you strike, not gold well, oil. So you figure out there's an oil well in your land.
Now what happens is if you have enough money, if you have enough power, you are safe to a certain extent. You're still going to lose that land, definitely, but you're safe to a certain extent. Let's say a poor person finds gold, oil, or any national resource, any resource that is valuable to the nation. Well, first of all, they got to make sure nobody finds out about it, because whoever is in power might just their land rights might just get strategically reallocated, or
which also has been a trend in our constitution / government / execution of laws and rights.
let's say you are Mohan Pyare, and you are a farmer and you have a reasonable farm. You found oil on your farm. Now you are scared for your life because at most you're scared for your life, because what could happen is the Babu or whoever knows that you have oil on your land really want you to sell your land to them before the government proposes the acquisition of your land, so that whatever muavja or remuneration you will get from the government, you won't. They would obviously, your local gundas, your local goons will come to you and want to buy that land, buy in quotes, that land from you. Now, let's say you're rich, you found oil on your land. What happens then?
But how can they just get away with, acquiring your land? Like, are there no checks in place? Like, how can you just end up losing your land just because a local goon or a local government employee knows about it?
Well, you're not going to lose it. They're quote unquote buy it from you.
Under duress, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I guess that, obviously, yes, under duress. But threats don't always have to be explicit.
Of course.
Sometimes it could just be, there's this guy who is the politician in this area. He comes with 5 cars filled with goons to your house and says, I'm buying this land from you and this is how much I'm going to pay you.
Doesn't really need to spell out much after that, I'm guessing.
Another way is they come to you, sit on your table, take out their gun, put it on the table, and then say, I'm going to buy this land from you. Again, circling back, let's say everything happens by the book. What happens if you found oil and you're super rich? Let's say you're rich, you found oil on your 100-acre farm. What would happen by the book? What would happen is, now the government will give you a proposal. You could say it's a proposal. Government will
make us an offer we can't refuse.
Exactly. Government will give you an offer for muavza or remuneration, fair remuneration that you should get for your land, because the oil is owned by the government.
And why might that be?
You don't have mining rights in India. Everything under the surface of the land is owned by the Indian government. Nobody owns it. You can lease it from the government, but you can't own any mineral rights. In India, individuals cannot own mineral rights.
So you're telling me essentially any kind of like limestone and granite, like whatever mining of any kind of mineral, not just oils,
Yes.
is under lease.
Yes.
Well, that's, I will say, in mincing my words, I would say not the best.
Okay, so in India, you do not have the extraction rights of any minerals under the soil. You do not have ownership in most cases. There are very, very rare cases where you might own the minerals under your soil. For example, you found oil in your 100-acre farm.
I guess that's dependent on which state and the state-specific laws then.
Yes, but then again, you have rights to ownership of that. Now, you can't sell those ownership rights also. You're super lucky to be in a state where all the rights are, all the laws are in your favor.
You actually own the stuff under the ground, basically.
Yeah, you own the land and the oil under the land. Somehow, you are in that state and you're so lucky and all that. Now, you can't sell the rights to that oil, meaning you can sell the topsoil, you can sell the land top part to somebody, but you can't transfer the right to oil extraction, which means you essentially cannot sell the land because right of easement will apply, meaning whoever can will extract the oil will need to have ownership of the land also.
So basically you're telling me that it's a lot like the laws of UK, where they have the sovereignty, something that anything that is found in their land is the property of the crown.
The king, queen, whoever, the inbreds own it, the supreme inbreds, who by the way originate from Germany. But again, this one is not specifically the crown bashing, which I love to do. Well, let's get back to the topic. Now, even though in this specific super lucky, super rare instance where you own the oil under the ground, you still don't have extraction rights. You cannot profit from it. You cannot extract it. For that, you will still need state licenses.
Even if you want to extract it, let's say for your own private use.
Yeah, you cannot use it for extract it for your own. For example, let's say You found gold under your land. You can't just go sell that gold.
Or like do anything with it.
Or just take out the gold and put it in your house because you don't have extraction rights.
So you can just look at it and be happy, I guess.
Essentially, the only option you have is sell it to the government, ultimately.
So it's a very roundabout way of saying that, because in most cases I'm assuming they don't also then give out the the leases and whatnot for mining that.
Obviously they wouldn't, because why would they? Why would they allow you to mine something that they can just own?
Well, also I guess it's a sort of a waiting game, because, well, how long are you gonna wait? The government is forever.
There is one way for the government to give you the right of extraction of that resource under your soil. Corruption. Again, communism.
Yeah. Well, so basically we took this from USSR, the abolishment of rights under certain, like, just, I don't know, whims and fancy strike. We started from the 5-year plans.
Yeah.
And something else we borrowed from the USSR. See, we took apparently inspiration, I'm guessing, because we did not exactly execute it to the T, fundamental rights from the USA, but something great we took from USSR was fundamental duties and the ideals of justice, of social, economic and political sort.
Wait, USSR? That's where we took the ideals of justice from? The same state that had the gulags? Right?
And also fundamental duties, which is right on point, because their whole idea of duty to your land and duty to your country are very extensive.
Let me remember something. From each according to his capability, to each according to his needs. That sounds all very good, but that simply means I make 10 doubloons. I give 10 doubloons. You need 1 doubloon, but you make none. You get my doubloons.
Yeah, essentially that.
Okay, let me explain how communism does not work, and people are still going to say something or the other. But let me put down my argument.
Break down the principle. And this is communistic theory. We're not even talking about practice. Practice, it has never worked. No, China, it doesn't work in China. Well, we'll get back to that. But even in theory, communism cannot work. Why? Why might you say, dear lad? So, let's say there's person X and there's person Y. Person X is very productive and makes 5 doubloons a week. Person Y is not so productive, let's say, and makes 0 doubloons. The government, through its, let's say the government here, is perfect in its studies and surveys and exactly found out the exemplary sample of a government.
Yeah, and they just found out perfectly how much exactly does a person need to live off of. And they came up with the number 1 doubloon. You make 5 doubloons a week. You, according to the government, need only 1 doubloon a week. Government comes, takes your 5 doubloons, says, hey, you only need 1 to live off of. Here's the 1. We'll redistribute the rest of your 4 doubloons to somebody else who may need it.
Based on their needs.
Good principle. But why would you keep on making 5 doubloons? The government is gonna come, take away the 4, and you're still gonna get the 1. Why would you make 4 extra? Why would you just chill? That's number 1. Right. So the first thing that's gonna happen is person X is just gonna go, hey, how about instead of a machine, I just be a person. If I need 1 doubloon and no matter what I do, I will only get 1 doubloon, why would I make more doubloons? So,
and it is already guaranteed by the government that I will get my 1 doubloon.
So the person is going to make, at first, start making 1 doubloon and spend the rest of the time chilling with his family and doing whatever he likes. No, it's probably not going to be productive. So first, person X is going to say, hey, how about I just make 1 doubloon and stop making the rest of the 4, since I ain't ever going to see them again anyway. Right?
Yeah. And I don't get to keep them. I don't get to be like, hey, maybe I save it today and my family gets to chill a bit later. That's not a concept.
There is no perceivable benefit that person X can ever derive from that extra 4 doubloons he makes by being extra productive himself. Let's say he needs to work 5 hours more each day to make 5 more doubloons in that week. Why would he work 5 more hours when he is guaranteed that 1 doubloon that he's making? Now, government has guaranteed the 1 doubloon. The person Y that's not making any doubloons is still getting that 1 doubloon. Person X sees that and says, hey, maybe I can just chill and not even make that 1 doubloon.
which eventually, if you take it away from just looking at these two people, X and Y, you realize if person X and person Y both are not producing any doubloons and both need one doubloon each, well, where are those two doubloons gonna come from?
Good question. Let me answer that. The government is going to realize, oh, our productivity is going down. We need more doubloons so that we can distribute more doubloons. What would the government do? Hey, how about all these people? You need to make doubloons. What, you wanna chill? How about now you have to make doubloons?
Because we need said doubloons.
That's called
for you.
That's called forced labor camps. Every single communist government ever has always had forced labor camps.
Also known as gulags in Russia.
Not necessarily gulags always. In Russia there were gulags, but they've always been forced labor camps.
Yeah.
In every single communistic government ever. Want to take the example of Venezuela, the latest one? Want to take the example of China? You don't think there's forced labor camps there?
They literally have so many, not enough, I would say, but
people jumping off of buildings?
No, also outrage about the Uyghur Muslims and their forced labor camps and how their bodies are being apparently melted into goop to be repurposed into products.
That particular section of the world has always done this. They have the principle of utilizing every single part of the human sacrifice, and they call it different names, different words, different analogies, but it still is the human sacrifice, the forced labor, the unwanted class. Currently it's the Uyghur Muslims, it's whatever, but it's always been some class in the communist system and the feudal system of Japan and other, where enemy of the state or undesirable people or criminals or something were used in very heinous ways. They would be worked to once, they would be well, what would you do with the body? Why would you waste the body? And that's what's happening in China, and that's what used to happen also in Japan, and that's what happens always in that particular section of the world. What they did in Japan, let me give you a lesson in history, is a few things were very famous. For example, human bone ornaments, human bone utensils,
and pickled
oh no, you're talking about
dingleberries.
You're talking about Unit 471. Follow I Did a Thing podcast for that. An episode is coming on that. We're going to talk about Unit 471 and the fun little experiments they did on people. Well,
circling back.
So, yeah, all the ways to utilize a human to the absolute maximum possibility. China is making wigs out of human hair.
Which humans, might you ask?
The undesirables. Why would you want to know more about them? Shut up about them. How about no?
And that's their global stance about it.
Yes.
And for a lot of countries trying to pander to China,
No,
that's their global stance too.
I have a better way of saying what's China's stance about it. Ask me what's China's stance about it.
What's China's stance about
What
it?
about the people he murdered?
What murder?
That's one way they're using it. They're making human hair wigs. They're making leather from human skin.
They're making something akin to horse glue.
Yeah, except it's human glue. They're melting them to goop and using that to stick things. So, and that's always been the communistic dream. Exploit somebody. That's essentially what it is.
Exploit somebody and find some way or the other to excuse your inefficiencies on a certain group or class of people.
Yes.
In USSR, I think it was the
Many people, many different
at
classes of
different
people.
times, yeah.
Yes. But communism, that's another thing about communism. Communism cannot work without a system like capitalism. Because where would you steal shit from? Where would you steal things from? For example, also they are dreamers. They are dreamers in the true sense. Every communist is just a stupid child who's just dreaming about fantastical things that would never happen. For example, Stalin dreaming about utopian farms.
Which is a very widely documented failure in itself.
Another episode on I Did a Thing, it's going to be the cannibal island of Stalin. Go follow I Did a Thing for that. I'm just going to keep plugging my podcast.
Now there are obviously certain good things that we took from certain countries. For example, we took our fundamental rights, the 6 fundamental rights that are stated also in our preamble, and their inspiration was from the United States of America. And one of those rights is right to freedom, for one.
Pause. We're definitely foreshadowing. This is how we took a good thing and made it bad.
You have been given the rights by the government and not you have rights as a citizen, and this is how we curtail government overreach. This is what happens.
Let me try to explain that. According to the Indian Constitution, the rights that you have, all your fundamental rights, are granted by the government. They are what's called qualified rights. That means the government gave you rights. You don't have innate rights as a human. You got rights because the government said you have these rights. If the government gave you rights, the government can take them away. The government giveth, the government taketh away. While in, I'm not even going to say United States here, although that is one of the best examples, the best example. But under natural law, the individual has rights, innate rights. For example, if you are in nature, just an individual, for example, all the tribes, what are your rights? First right is to protect yourself.
And that does not mean, obviously, rights only extend as far as you're not.
Your rights end where somebody else's rights begin. Meaning, you cannot infringe upon somebody else's rights.
Yeah, so freedom of speech, right to protection does not extend to the fact of taking away someone else's right. Freedom of a right to protection does not mean it gives you. So many people make this argument of, if we give the right to protection, so you can just go kill somebody. No, dude. Murder is not the same as protecting yourself. We already have laws against murdering people.
We don't need any laws against protecting yourself or your property or other people.
Protecting yourself is a defensive action that will obviously lead to infringement of someone else's right only because first they stepped into yours. If someone is posing a threat to you or to your family or to your property, you should have the right to defend it against the insidious.
And one argument constantly heard about using lethal force against people who are just trying to steal is, so you're going to kill somebody because they're trying to steal something from you. You value material objects more than human life. Yeah, that specific human life I don't value.
And also, how exactly am I supposed to figure out that dude's just gonna steal? I mean, if someone's already doing something like thieving.
If somebody's already in my house and trying to take my stuff, how am I supposed to decipher what exactly their intent is?
And someone trying to do thievery does not exactly make for a very good subject of trustworthiness.
Well, it's going all into right to private defense. Let's pivot back.
So when initially our constitution was made, it was with our fundamental rights as stated in the preamble. Then started coming in the amendments.
The first amendment,
which also included Schedule 9.
The 9th schedule added by the Constitution's First Amendment Act in 1951. One might now think what the 9th
Keep in mind,
Amendment
1950 is when we actually concluded our constitution. So it's just like a few months later or within the first year.
That means the section of the government that was crafting this 9th schedule was already thinking about adding these restrictions to your freedoms. When the actual freedom-loving people were drafting the constitution and giving you the freedoms, there was another section that was going to take power that was thinking, whatever they grant, how will we take this away?
A new constitutional device called Schedule 9 introduced to protect against laws that are contrary to constitutionally guaranteed fundamental rights.
Protect who? Understand the language here. Repeat the language, please.
Introduced to protect against laws that are contrary to constitutionally guaranteed fundamental rights.
Now, constitutionally guaranteed fundamental rights are given to the citizens. So, protecting against your rights, who are they protecting against your rights? Your rights are always against the government, against the infringers, the people who would infringe upon it. So, this Schedule 9 is added to add laws.
Or give rights to the government to
give rights to the government to curtail your rights.
And these specifically have covered and encroached upon property rights, freedom of speech, and equality before law, which I would say is a very it gives away the plot.
Now, funny. I don't know if you meant that as a joke, but a lot of people had to give away their plots. Now, under Article 31B. Article 31B was specifically introduced to protect these laws from being invalidated on the grounds of contravening any fundamental rights. This is the exact article where they said that your fundamental rights can be encroached upon by these laws. Any laws under this schedule using Article 31B can infringe upon your fundamental rights.
And
The 9th schedule cannot be challenged in court for violating fundamental rights such as equality or freedom. It
how
cannot
exactly is this even a thing? Because it doesn't really make much sense of, hey, we're thinking of doing something illegal and you can do nothing about it.
You cannot even challenge it in court.
It is so blatant in going against the rights of its citizens that, well, the line is a dot to it. It's so far.
That is such a lame joke.
Yes. Well, this deserves a lame joke. This doesn't deserve anything good. One of the things that also, in our rights, the fact that they were made conditional. They did not start off being so, but every amendment after amendment, and with so many additions to Schedule 9, which are how many? I think 200 something, right?
Did you mean to say that these rights were in the original constitution conditional?
So basically, in the initial draft or the original form in which we launched our constitution, it was obviously we had rights and they still had some conditionalities to.
So our rights to begin with were conditional. Our rights to begin with were not fundamental rights. They're only fundamental rights if they're fundamental to your existence. These, I don't think you can in true spirit call them fundamental rights. They're granted rights. They're qualified fundamental rights. Meaning from the get-go, and every country has certain curtailments to these rights. Every constitution has certain curtailments to these rights, but you still have the right to protest against such curtailments. Our country, our constitution provided us, quote unquote, provided us these rights with restrictions such as, okay, they might be suspended. These are the asterisks in our rights. Every single right comes within terms and conditions apply. What are the terms and conditions under which these rights might be curtailed? I'm going to give you the less problematic ones first. Suspension during emergencies. Understandable, rights might be curtailed during emergencies.
However, it takes away from the fact technically that emergencies can be executed at any whim or fancy.
As taken from the Weimar Constitution, from the German Nazi Constitution. Another asterisk, another condition to your rights is preventive detention. Meaning, I think everybody's heard that you can be held in judicial custody for 24 hours before being presented in front of a magistrate.
Yeah.
So any public officer, a police officer meaning, can hold you in custody for 24 hours, detain you for 24 hours without any cause or reason. That, I don't know how it is, it's such an oversight is in our laws. It is punishment by procedure. A person who is protesting any simple thing, let's say, not even protesting, a person who has, let's say you have a problem with a particular policeman. You cannot mess with policemen. This is another reason. You cannot have civil disagreements with policemen because you never know when they will grab you and put you in detention for 24 hours.
Because they legally can.
Because they legally can. Sure, you can then sue them and everything, but this is their right. Now, the third condition to your rights is judicial review. The courts can review and uphold restrictions if they are deemed reasonable and not arbitrary. This restriction only points to the most problematic restriction. The most problematic restriction to your rights is, or the condition to your rights is reasonable restrictions. What might you say are reasonable restrictions?
Well, far as I know, they're not exactly specified.
Yes, they are not. I mean, okay. As per the constitution, as per the drafters, this is specified enough. Let me specify what
they have specified.
Yeah. Rights like freedom to speech can be restricted. Other rights also. For example, the right to freedom. Yeah, it can be curtailed or restricted by law for reasons such as number 1, sovereignty or integrity of India.
What might that be exactly?
Oh, we'll discuss all of these in detail, but let me give you the reasons, and
yeah.
I just want to see your reactions. Mm-hmm. Our listeners cannot see your reactions, but I do dearly. Sovereignty and integrity of India. Number 2, security of the state. Number 3, public order.
What?
Yeah. Number 4, decency.
Okay.
Number 5, morality. Your fundamental rights can be curtailed by the government on the basis of morality.
Well, that's very vague grounds, I'd say.
And the rest reasonable restrictions are actually reasonable. For example, contempt of court, defamation, and incitement to an offense, which I absolutely agree with. These are the three that are reasonable restrictions.
Yeah, basically, if you're going and calling for murdering people on the street, well, don't.
I would say most people don't get their restrictions applied for. The people who do this
Actually, get away scot-free mostly because of
Yes.
I have no idea why.
because they're on the right of the policies. They're in with whatever.
Whatever the going, it's like a clique. It's like it's like school politics. There are two groups, and whoever's in with the crowd
Yes.
gets to get away with stuff.
Now, do you want to discuss each of these restrictions, restrictive conditions under the reasonable restrictions column?
Yes, please do. At least because those sound incredibly vague to me.
Oh, I will try to explain them, but they're still going to be vague because that's what they are, vague. Now, number one, sovereignty and integrity. This protects this restriction protects the unity and territorial integrity of India. It means laws can restrict speech and actions advocating secession or undermining national unity. Essentially, if people start saying, if person X starts saying that state Y should secede from India, all their rights can be curtailed, especially their right to speech.
That's messed up.
What is the procedure? And by the way, states, governments can pass laws restricting speech and other rights based on this restriction, and courts will review and decide if this falls under reasonable restriction. Now, second, security of the state. This covers threats to nation's existence, such as inciting war, rebellion, or external aggression.
So basically, you're telling me like when 26/11 happened, when a different government was in play and they did not take any action against the aggressors.
Pakistanis, you mean?
Yeah, or the terrorist groups.
That hailed from Pakistan.
Yes. So the people who were at that point calling for action and calling, to war could technically have been or.
Yes, the saving grace and all of this in our whole constitution, we are not talking here about things that have happened, or we are talking about history, but we are not solely saying, oh, our constitution is so bad and has been misused. No, it is the potential of it being misused. Even Indira Gandhi used only a certain limit of the power. She could have gone so much further.
Maybe she lacked imagination.
She definitely did. But yes, people in times of strife calling for war or external aggression
Should not lead to people being thrown into jail.
Yes, but it can definitely, and not just jail. All their rights can be curtailed by this. Now let's come to the vaguer ones. I don't know, word.
Vaguer, yeah.
Now let's come to the more vague ones. Public order. This relates to peace and order in society.
That's extremely vague again.
Yep.
Because what dictates?
Using this, speech or actions that could cause riots, unrest, or violence can be prevented.
Could cause.
Yes, could cause.
Everything is just hypothetical.
Yes, and anything could cause riots, unrest, or violence.
It's the same as when Trump was apparently.
Dog whistles.
Yeah.
So you don't need a direct incitement.
A person can say something and someone can just say, oh, but he was probably implying this and this is what people went with and did this violent action.
And guess who interprets it? The legislature and the courts. So let's say you are not in with the current government or whatever government of your time, let's say. Just assume. Please imagine, don't just say I'm against the government, this government or the other. I am not. Nobody here is against any governments.
Just as hypothetical as this whole section of what we're discussing is, this is also hypothetical.
So, what most countries that actually guarantee your freedoms require you to do is have a definitive call to violence or call to unrest or call to riots, a specific provable fact that you said something that will cause or would cause. If people agreed to your sentiment, if people agreed to your words, you said to do this. Let's say person X says to go and person Y.
Like, for example, in a very, very recent, very, very, very publicized situation of certain India's got latent situation with beer biceps.
A lot of people were calling for his unalive.
Yes. Which
for cancelling his subscription to Life.
Yeah. And basically that technically would qualify for calling to arms or calling
to cause harm.
to a person or persons
But-
thereof.
But this is not about that. This specific one, that specific call to harm is also covered under reasonable restrictions, and I agree with that part. I agree with the part where if you actively call for destruction of public property, if you actively call for harm to individuals, or in any sense causing harm to the nation or individuals, if you actively say the words to do that, go and do that, if you say that, then yes, take away their rights, they should be sued. And I'm not saying take away their rights that they never should get rights. No, they should pay appropriate recompense for that. If it's
In
defamation,
a proper procedural code.
yes, if it's defamation, we don't hang people for defamation. We make them pay the amount that they caused in harm because it's a civil suit. Now, that is different. This disturbance to public order is different. This is all hypothetical. This, if your actions or words could have caused the riots, could have caused unrest, could have caused violence. Anything in this world could cause unrest, violence, or riots. For example, we saying that I hate communism, and communism has never worked. Now, this could cause either communistic protests and riots and unrest or violence, or anti-communistic protests, riots, and violence.
Yeah.
It could. Never have I ever, or would I ever say that you should do this, but it could be interpreted that it could cause that.
See, that's the problem. Someone says something and the person listening to that thing could interpret it 10 different ways. It really doesn't make any sense actually, persecuting the person who has said the thing for ensuing harm or lack thereof. They're not calling for that. It's just someone else's warped mind that has gone to that conclusion.
Now, coming back to the thing that I missed, missed this boat. I skipped this point, beach mein. Let's say you're not in with whatever government is in your time, and you say something that government thinks, oh, we can use this. You didn't mean to cause harm. You didn't say anything that would lead somebody to cause harm, riots, violence, or anything. But that could be interpreted,
Because they want to interpret.
and
that
everything could be. Then that government can use your words that were absolutely innocent, to essentially frame you, take your rights away, persecute you, make you a political prisoner, all of that. Thank God this has, Indira Gandhi aside, thank God this has not happened.
It's not a popular phenomenon.
It's not a popular
essentially.
phenomenon, and we're happy about that. Woohee!
Personally, though, I just had a thought. Technically, does this also not go against habeas corpus?
This is reasonable restriction. It is the suspension of habeas corpus.
No,
Your
I
rights
don't
are
mean it
taken
that
away.
way. I don't mean it that way. I am saying that obviously taking the rights away in that specific situation. I just mean it doesn't really make much sense to assume intent when the words do not reflect so.
Oh, you mean burden of proof?
Yeah, oh sorry.
Yeah. So, no. As we said, this is vague. And what would you require proof of? You just need proof of, could it cause riots, unrest, or violence?
I'd say that's yes for 90% of things in the world.
No, that's yes for 100% of things in the world. Can something cause something?
Yes.
Yes. Something can always cause something.
That's how something works.
Yes. Now, let's come to the last one. Decency or morality.
Which again is so freaking vague, because it could and also, oh, by the way, isn't that conditional based on the current
Yes, let me explain that. then.
Yeah.
Prevents obscene, vulgar, or offensive speech and actions as per prevailing social standards.
It is not just vague, it is based on something even vaguer, because who dictates the prevailing social standards?
It's essentially majority rule. If, let's say, 51 people agree that marrying only one person or monogamy is obscene
Yes.
or vulgar or offensive, or saying that you should have monogamy, or let's say 51% of the
The
population.
idea of monogamy, let's say, it's just the idea is made an obscene or a vulgar thing to talk about.
Yeah, or let's say 51% agree to any good principle. Think about any good principle that we believe. Let's say 51% of the people agree that talking about freedom is obscene, vulgar, or offensive, or just offensive to them. It's offensive to 51% of the people. That means it's the prevailing social standard. So you could be persecuted for talking about freedom because people don't agree with you.
Because that is not the prevailing social standard.
or take any other example.
Okay, let's say 51% of the people say it is a normal good practice to throw trash out, and it is actually obscene and vulgar to put trash in dustbins.
Well, then suddenly you could be persecuted for putting trash in dustbins. Or if 51% of the people agree that recycling is obscene, then you could be persecuted for recycling.
Because how dare you put, I guess,
Because-
try and sell your...
Because this restriction is solely based on prevailing social standards. Another thing to remember here is who decides what is a prevailing social standard. The legislature decides.
Because there is also not, it's not like they're gonna go door to door, ask everybody on, hey, what's your view about this specific issue?
Oh no! This requires spicy. The legislature decides what is a prevailing social standard, and the courts interpret if the legislature decided correctly that this is a prevailing social standard. Yes, because the most socially prevalent people and the most socially adept in knowing what social standards are prevalent are the ones that are our politicians, right?
Yeah.
The youngest ones, the most hip people in the world are politicians and judges.
Yeah.
And hey, don't get me wrong, I don't agree with any of this. I don't want anybody to curtail anybody's rights based on prevailing social standards.
My whole point is I don't want anyone curtailing rights based on whatever in the heck, except for a certain few things that, as is stated, goes against someone else's rights.
Or at least you don't want them to be taken away for vague ideas.
Which again happened with Indira Gandhi's whole situation of the emergency. They went on to do
Horrible stuff.
many horrible things. They abolished the property rights for 1978, which I have still no idea what exactly was she trying to achieve with that.
They also, there was a gold grab in India too.
To conclude, in our past we have had multiple instances of how and when our rights have been curtailed, and of how exactly our practice of having taken really bad laws and systems from certain bad actors, bad countries, have led to the possibility of having happened. It has happened in our past, and but the problem is there is still a potentiality for that happening in our future.
As it is said, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it.
And so that was our goal for today's podcast. There are so many things that we would love to continue, and we would delve deeper into the details of how those infringements have happened with us. But for now, let's end it on a high note.
We'll have to conclude this, and give us love in comments and etc. or whatever you wanna give, I guess.
No, don't just give us whatever, please.
Give me money, please. Haha.
Well, we would love if you subscribe if you want to listen to more of our content. A like would go a really long way.
Like, subscribe, and if we get enough likes and etc. on this podcast, we'll make a part 2 about this. Let us know if you would like to listen to a part 2 about this series,
where we dive deeper into the details of infringements of our rights in our post-independence past.
or possibilities of infringement that could happen, that loopholes in our constitution that perhaps need to be fixed.
Thank you for being with us for so long, and we love you for your patience. Stay tuned.
Bye.
Bye.